Well, we were asked to come up and kind of put things in perspective of national security, and as I thought about that and how I'd lead this off, I come back to, what keeps me up at night? I work for the Department of Defense, and I work in the technology area, and we focus a lot on cyber and all the tools that are out there to protect us inside the building. From a national security standpoint, cyber follows me on my way home when I'm in my car. It's pervasive throughout everything I do in my life. So really, I said, what's the national security problem or challenge? And it's me. It's us. And so what I wanted to start with is sort of understanding how we've become more and more dependent on technology to live our lives, and whether we recognize the responsibility that comes with that. And what are the trends, right? What are the trends in the number of exploits and penetrations and cyber cases? And it's beyond just what you hear about in terms of malware and ransomware. It's also information operations. How are they using social media as a mechanism to disrupt operations, right? I'll give an example. And this is purely hypothetical. Inside your business, you're talking about restructuring, you're going to have layoffs. That's probably not something you want messaged. You want to control that message and that narrative, but there are adversaries out there that will try to get ahead of that and disrupt your operations by turning your own workforce against you by controlling that message before you had a chance to do it. There's one example. Understanding we are a teleworking industry, and so now my network at home is your network. I'm connecting to your work network, right? Well, my kid's Xbox is on that network. My refrigerator is on that network, right? The expansiveness, again, of where the technology, the connectedness of our devices, brings, again, that responsibility. And so it's not just the workforce in the business, it's our children, right? And so we talked yesterday about K through 12, you're hearing that common theme, and the other common theme is we're all in this together. So I wanted to kick this off just to kind of say, those are the things that kind of keep me up at night. Is I'm doing, governmental work from my home, and I'm connecting through my Wi-Fi network at home that my children are on, that my TVs are on, and do I understand the vulnerabilities and the responsibility that I have? Where was the education? Because I did not get that education in K through 12, right? I don't think our kids today are getting that education in K through 12. And then how does that domino effect up, right? If we can get the pool of potential hires to be more educated and well-rounded, more aware, long before we go to hire them, right? They're starting from a higher starting point of understanding that makes us all better. So that's what I wanted to kick it off, just to say that's where I think, at a national security, is that it is pervasive, and it's not just us in this room. It's our significant others, it's our children, it's their friends when they come over and hey, what's your Wi-Fi password? Because they're giving it out freely without recognition that they need to think about that, right? So I just wanted to kind of kick that off and, maybe get an industry perspective. And certainly, we have the FBI who sees, the rate continue to increase in terms of number of cyber crimes that are hitting us. So, and then get y'all's perspective. So,
well, I'll start off, Eric. I was the CIO for the city of Tallahassee, Florida, for several years with full utility as well as central administrative IT. I made the comment a number of times that what kept me awake was not the things that I knew about. Because if I knew about them, I was engaged in trying to do something about it. The thing that kept me awake at night was the thing I didn't know about yet, that I knew was out there, that I didn't know about. Previous speaker mentioned 279 days before recognizing and finding the threat that is the dwell time within a network. Whether it's in your home network, you made a really good point there of our home Wi-Fi's have become an extension of our offices. Now, whether it's a connection at that point or a connection in the home office, that dwell time and that thing that's out there that I don't know about that is waiting to go off. I've heard a number of speakers talk about the exfiltration of data. And they may not be there to do malicious damage. They're there to gather intellectual property, which I'm sure you have 100 stories about, but collecting that data and using our networks for malicious intent.
Well, really, you both have talked about what keeps you up at night, and I should be the worry for everyone in this room for when you do fall asleep, because generally, if myself or one of my cyber team aren't at your office for a cyber threat briefing, seeing me or any of my team walk into your space is your worst nightmare, right? It means that you have suffered an attack and that you have had a breach, you've had some sort of compromise, you have persistent access, you have lost intellectual property. I can tell you, I had my team pull the latest number from, hopefully you all have heard of IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center. Well, they actually are a complaint repository, and I'm able to extract information about the complaints that have come in from South Carolina this year. And since January 1st through August 31st, there were about 4,770 complaints from South Carolina, totaling, and I'm going to just double check my numbers here because it's something I wanted to throw out. Over $61 million in loss to our state, to people in our state. Okay, so here's the thing. Those are cyber criminals. This is strictly fraud, and this is to line pockets. The problem is that the tools and techniques, the procedures they use to get in and steal that $61 million that should be in our economy, there are state actors, nation-state actors, who want to ride on those tools to make it look like it's just fraud and get that access and get into your systems, those business networks, to get that intellectual property. I can put a dollar loss on fraud. I can't put a dollar loss on intellectual property lost here. And we know, we the FBI see, even in this state, the four main, the big players, we say in the national security realm, being North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia. And each of them have a different technique to access your information and to undermine our economy and our people. And they're not just looking at businesses, but they want to get into you as individuals. Because once they've compromised you at your home through your Internet of Things, your car that's connected to your phone, that you use to connect to your servers, it's an access point for them, and they can own your system. We see that North Koreans just this year, in one single case, FBI case, the FBI was able to seize over $620 million that the North Koreans had stolen through ransomware, malware, and e-skimming, targeting banks, ATM, SWIFT transfer mechanisms, and cryptocurrency exchanges. So one case in this year, $620 million lost to the United States and recovered. The Iranian actors are interesting because they really want to look for targeting infrastructure. And we see it over and over again where they want to be able to have control of things like our power grid. But what they're looking for, and their main method of attack, is to look for unpatched systems. So we always harp on patching our systems, but then we have that specialized software program that we paid to have developed, and actually it doesn't run with the new patch until that company updates that software. So we need to have these things happening in tandem. We can't slow down. We can't turn our backs.
So Susan, real quick, you mentioned, lots of examples. You clearly have an eyeball on all these instances, they're not widely reported or shared, right? And so it kind of gets back to the culture within not just industry, but it almost comes as an embarrassment to admit that I was attacked, I was hacked, my password was compromised. I think this gets back to that national security level concern that within our culture, within our society, we are easily made to feel embarrassed. Social media is now a tool that is used in conjunction with a cyber attack to shape opinions and kind of bully you not to reveal. Have you experienced that in terms of, do we recognize we have a problem and are we willing to admit it publicly and ask for help? Because the other thing I've witnessed in the last 2 years coming out of COVID, I think there's a willingness now generally within our culture to partner more than there was previously. We're seeing a willingness to break down silos and to have industry, government, academia partnerships more and more broadly. So the timing is right, I think, to really get after the culture piece, but you can't lead cultural change without leadership. And so can you talk about corporate leadership and maybe federal leadership and how we might come together from a top down to drive cultural change to get after this problem?
Absolutely. It's almost as there's a thought of failure if you've been breached, that you get blamed. Somebody's got to take the blame for this failure. We have to remember that the individuals that are perpetrating either the cybercrime or the nation-state actors, they are an elite professional group. They're not somebody that's running from their parents' basement. They are an elite professional group of hackers. I tell our clients regularly, every system is vulnerable, period. Every system is vulnerable. It's a matter of protecting, detecting, and responding. Because if somebody wants to get in bad enough, they will. It is just fact. So protect as much as possible, detect as quickly as possible, and respond to mitigate impact as much as possible. And that's the 3 steps. But to your point, when organizations have breaches, they regularly try to keep it out of the paper. They don't want it to be announced. They don't want there to be that negative connotation of we didn't do something we should have done.
Yeah, and I think historically, and I'm a product of this, right? 20 years ago, I was a special agent and I worked cyber crimes. And back then, when we responded, we told you, step back, we need to do our forensics, you can't touch anything. Meanwhile, you've got a business you're trying to recover, and there may or may not have been some sort of press release about the event. We've grown in the last 20 years. Now we don't ask you to step back. We tell you your first step is get your business running, and then we work with your cyber people to collect evidence so that we can bring risk and consequence to these cyber actors, be it criminals or nation-state actors. So, and to take it a step further, we have a couple programs now where you can request threat briefings from your local FBI office. So FBI Columbia covers the state of South Carolina. I have 8 sub-offices around the state. So I do have people throughout the state who can come do threat briefings if you need them. We also have partnership programs like InfraGard, where you partner and we're able to push out threat information as it comes live. And then we have a new program that's called Taloneye, and it allows, if you sign up, there's a process where the FBI has a program now that will monitor your IP range for external activity that might be malicious and then reports it to you. So, we're trying to look at that. We also are working from a task force perspective. So do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, actually, I wanted to kind of hit on a point you just made and really kind of engage the audience into the conversation. So the FBI, you just said, has services and tools. I know the federal government has services and tools that you can access. The state of South Carolina has services and tools. Industry, I know industry has a full gauntlet of, but is there a clearinghouse where you can go to find the resources that you need in order to make this challenge smaller for industry? Or is the landscape difficult? Because how many different tools are out there, and which one, and at what cost? And I think that sometimes is a little challenging in itself. And I don't know that I know of a single resource repository where they can go and find, how can I talk to Susan and her team? How can I talk with SLED? Because South Carolina Law Enforcement Division has a ton of resources and services. How can I get within state government to find resources? Show of hands, anybody that knows of a single repository of get help when it comes to better preparing us for cyber? That's what I thought. So maybe we come out of this conference and we think about, how can we collectively start moving towards more of a coalition, a partnership, forming those partnerships, and making, becoming the customer base that demands that a clearinghouse for these kinds of knowledge sharing services be available, right? So that we know where to go to get help. I think that might be helpful.
Well, it'd also be extremely helpful in just the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the adversary. If they're knowing how another organization was breached, gives us defenses that can prepare us for the eventual attack using those same TTPs. Knowing what's out there, knowing where to get help, but also knowing what to defend against, that intelligence that is available on an unclassified level, knowing that to be able to be prepared.
I would offer that both InfraGard and Talon, I would fill part of that with huge gaps, obviously, and then the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a newer organization through DHS, has a lot of information and recommendations. They actually have a tool that they recommend you use on your systems at home and at work to identify those Internet of Things items. And it is called Census, which is downloadable on their website. To do that same thing, to identify your Internet of Things on your work network and on your home network. Shodan is used by the FBI. And the one thing that I wanted to point out is that ZoomEye, which I understand is quite popular, is actually owned by the Chinese. And we know that Chinese software, even required software within the country, is frequently embedded with malware and backdoors so that they can exploit other countries' information remotely. So,
well, I know you're on the HUA app here, so I'm going to send you a note and get more information about that. And I would encourage everyone else to do the same thing. I want to tie this back a little bit, though, with where we got to get and engage with academia, because we've got to push this down. We can't continue to try to identify and solve the problem, at the corporate, career-based level. How are we preventing, creating a culture of prevention versus reaction and corrective actions by leveraging our outreach within our communities through organizations that have focus in cyber and computer science clubs, being more active mentors. I think this is an important barrier that I'm seeing, is that a lot of these organizations that exist to try to get this further down in K through 12, they suffer because of lack of volunteers. And I think that's an area where we can also bring the really smart people from our individual organizations to help mentor and create a mentorship culture, and be a role model. So also practice what you preach. Don't let your kids see that you're not following safe cyber practices. is something that we could also reinforce. What are your thoughts on how we might do that?
A couple of examples that I'd like to give. I'll put a plug in for Tallahassee Community College. They have actually, with the Florida legislature, has approved them beginning a STEM charter high school. The graduates, they will take their first students next year. The graduates that come out of that course will have an AA. When they, as a 12th grade graduate, high school graduate, they will have an AA in cybersecurity, as well as every certificate that would allow them to step into a cybersecurity role. I think that is extremely forward-looking and will help with the talent gap as well. I would also, since you mentioned academia, I would love to see within our either high school or college curriculums having a basic personal privacy, cybersecurity basic requirement that every student goes through to see what the impacts and to see how to take basic steps of protection.
Yeah, I would say you gotta take a look at what age are we allowing our kids to have access to technology. That's the age we got to start training them.
I would agree.
Susan, what are your thoughts there?
Well, we do have a program K through 8. So I apologize. I will get information for you to put on the Whova app where it's a competition. A classroom can sign up to participate, and it's a cybersecurity competition around the country. And actually this year, elementary school in Chapin won. So
I know you work for the FBI. Is there anything secret about that program, or is that
No.
something that maybe industry could use you as a model?
Absolutely.
And let's let you be a cancer and start spreading that across our region. You got a good model to follow. We should try to copy.
We do have a way to request FBI speakers, and that's everything from at schools, at businesses, and we're happy to come meet with groups to spread the cybersecurity word. We really do need to get that word out there, but it hasn't become part of curriculum by default yet. So.
Well, we kind of showed that this is a national security challenge, so that means it affects all of us. Is there any who wants to be part of the chat today and maybe add some content? What are your thoughts? How are we going to get after this? We can't keep admiring this problem much longer. We gotta really start getting action, right? Seeing activities, and I think, like I said, I think the time is right. We're starting to see that now, bringing some focus to this, getting some alignment and leadership to drive from a top down, saying I want this. That's when things start happening, and so from a Naval Information Warfare Atlantic, I will tell my people I want this, so I can engage and get them to come. But it's got to be a team sport. We got to get everybody in the team. So, what are your thoughts? What do you got?
Good morning. My name is Jose Vasquez. I have a question, and will be for the special agent. So, on these data breaches, what do you see to be a common issue with these companies? Is it a lack of personnel, resources? Is it a lack of training or due diligence? Or is it a lack of incident response policies?
We see all of it, to be honest. But really, the common theme there is people, humans, right? People trust, people click. And so I think there's a lot of people who do have incident policies, and when an incident happens, they don't pull it out and follow it. So, a policy is only as good, or a procedure is only as good as how much you follow it. So we do encourage practicing the tabletop exercises, but that constant reminder, we all hate the InfoSec training, right? Everybody has probably a mandatory information security training that they have to go through every year. And what we see is that people don't like to do the training, but continually, year after year, there are people who just can't help themselves but to open emails and click on links.
Right.
And frankly, I have a little bit of a hard time with that. As we're a response agency, right? We're not first responders, but we're investigators, and we have an obligation to you in the community. If I find out my agents or my personnel are not opening emails, I'm going to go ballistic, right? That's not acceptable. Right. So where's the balance of my struggle is, okay, I need you to find out if that's a legitimate email coming in as a complaint with information that will lead to an investigation. But dear God, please don't click those links. Let's get farther down the road before anybody's clicking on a link. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, and I've got a couple of examples I want to throw out. Just like you said, somebody is going to click. The bad guys know if they send out enough phishing emails, somebody is going to click. Two examples I'd like to share that we sent out an email to everyone in this organization, about 2,500. It was not sophisticated. It literally said, click here, put in your login and password. That was it. It was not sophisticated. Click here, put in your login and password. Sent it out to about 2,500 people. 19 did. All it needed was one.
Right.
Another example, a very sophisticated, where we had done our research, we knew the head of the organization was an avid sportsman. Sent a very sophisticated Bass Pro Shop flyer to him. Single email to one person.
Very targeted.
Very targeted. We got 200 clicks. Because it was such a good deal, he forwarded it to everybody in his organization. We know the adversaries, the bad guys, they know somebody is going to click, which again, that leads to the protect as much as possible, then defend as your networks to the extent possible.
Well, really right now, there's very little risk to cyber actors and a whole lot of reward. And what we need to do as a whole of community is bring that risk and consequence to them, right? So we need to work together to bring all our tools together to get back up online, to make sure they can't get back in, and to get to that individual who may be in another state, another country, and make their life harder, take their money, take their ability to travel, whatever that may be, even if we can't arrest them and extradite them back to the United States. So I guess that's my
Yeah, I might stir the pot up a little bit with my question in addition. If you look at the infrastructure around our country, whether it's the electric grid, water treatment systems, a lot of it is very outdated. Some of it's privately held by industry. Some of it is little communities and cities that don't have any budget. All of that is vulnerable. Where does the money come from to fund these upgrades to the cybersecurity at all those levels? So good luck with that one.
Well,
look around the room. From everybody who turns on their light switch or turns on their sink. I was the technology director for the City of Tallahassee Utilities prior to being appointed the CIO. Do we have any folks in the electric utility in here? Because I'm fixing to make you mad. The press jumps on the electric grid, how important it is. I would argue without question that our water utilities far more important. And think about in your own life. If your electricity is out, we were out in a hurricane, my home was out for 9 days. It was annoying, difficult, but nobody had any health issues because of it. Now think about a high rise along the beach where there's no water. Without going too far, you can go a long time without turning on your lights, but you're going to flush every so often, and high rises become unlivable and unhealthy and a public issue very, very quickly without water. To your point, there is a great deal of expense that is necessary to bring those up to date. And the rural water systems, the cooperative electric systems have a long way to go to be truly secure and to be at a point where you can have confidence that they're not infected. And I'll take a little bit of a tangent here and say we hear quite frequently it's not if, it's when. I would argue the when has already occurred. Most systems are already infected. We just don't know it yet. So it's a matter of how are we going to respond when the adversary, whether it be one of those four that you mentioned, Susan, or some other organization pulls the trigger on their hooks that they have within the networks.
So I want to get to your, how do you pay for this? Well, so the point you bring up is a great one, and it's not lost on our federal government that these are issues that we need to be getting after. I will tell you from another national security perspective, we look in the future, disruption in the world will largely, we see a lot of conflict emerging due to access to drinkable water. Okay, that is becoming a scarce commodity in many areas of the world, right? And one of the things when we talk about our own national security, our complacency with what we perceive as being our biggest challenge or not, we live in a very safe and secure and technology advantaged society here in the United States. That's not what it's like outside the United States, right? We are very lucky to have everything that we have, but again, it goes back to what I kicked this off. It comes with a responsibility, right? To your specific point, that utility, so you're talking about industrial control systems, right? Congress talks about industrial control systems and the fact that we need to be taking a good look at this, right? What I think would be more effective is if we can partner in team and agree to have a one-to-many solution versus everyone trying to solve it with their own unique, exquisite, hard to train because again, if I'm working with Duke Power and I get a better job at Dominion Power, I want to be able to take all that training and understanding of how we protect the grid. That needs to be standardized and it needs to come with me, right? So I don't have to go through all the retraining, right? That's the workforce development and being able to recognize the workforce is going to continue to, move, right? And we've got to come up with systems and solutions that don't disrupt the ability of our organizations just because someone transferred to a different job, right? But I would just offer that there are funding sources out there through grants and other initiatives that are both private and public funded. But I would say we got to seek those out and do so with, again, a coalition group where we're all going to agree, hey, we're going to come to a common definition of what we think our biggest challenge is, and we're going to agree to use the solution as a common solution, because now as that solution gets pushed out and we need to patch it, everybody gets the patch. As we train to it, everybody gets the training, right? Now you're starting to be someone I want to promote getting funded, right? So I would offer that as an idea.
I can't specifically address the funding, but I can say that infrastructure specifically, March of this year, Congress passed a bill saying that infrastructure had to report to law enforcement when they've suffered an intrusion. And with that, that gives us the ability through CISA and FBI and fusion centers to push that information out to all infrastructure sectors, right? Not just the one that's been affected, but that way each sector can watch for those indicators and we can send the TTPs and people can look for remediation ahead of time before there's a breach. Good question, though. That's a tough one.
Right. Did you?
All right, good. All right, good. So I've got two. The first one being very quick. What's the recovery rate on lost assets?
Oh, it varies every year, actually. So we don't know. So what we do is track the losses through the year, And in IC3, there's a group called the Recovery Asset Team, and they actually have, they coordinate with banks throughout the world, and they are able, if they know, if the reporting is very swift, we say 72 hours or less, but really first 12, 24 hours that you've lost money as an individual or a corporation, they can actually freeze and seize those assets and bring them back. And we typically, we've had as high as 80% recovery rates some years. So don't know for this year yet, but great question.
All right, the second question, much more complicated. So you've listed a host of great tools and assets that the public can use. How do you bridge the trust gap, especially the current issues your agency's having in the public?
Sure.
And then on the private sector, the lack of trust that we're seeing from the government agencies as they haul in more tech companies in front of my agency. So how do we bridge that trust gap so people take advantage of these products?
Well, I will say from my agency, the trust issues right now haven't necessarily been with cyber, right? So I would start there, and I will 100% own that 20 years ago, we were a little bit difficult to deal with. You know, we had tunnel vision, we've got cyber actors, we've got to get them, everything else must stop. We don't operate that way now. We don't disclose information about the companies who've been breached. It's all kept confidential. The only caveat to that is if it goes to trial, obviously somebody's brought to justice, we have to talk about who suffered the breach. But, you know, so we have worked really hard, and we definitely still see those residual effects from 20 years ago. Companies that had a bad experience, or an individual that worked somewhere that had a bad experience. So we're working hard. We're trying to make sure that we're accessible, presenting, meeting at as many places as we can. We do participate in SC Kick with our cyber agents. So, you know, it is a long road, you know, that takes a long time to reestablish trust. So
I'd only offer, you know, trust is really not something two corporate entities can have.
yeah.
I can trust people. So, you know, we've got to make this a people discussion. And I think, you know, shining the light and getting this out of the darkness and where we can talk about it more openly and amongst everyone.
Sure.
I think then that's how you're going to build trust, is amongst the people working together day to day, you know, more collaboratively. That's where you're going to see trust get built. That's just my 2 cents.
Right. That's exactly where I was going, and I know I'm going to sound very vendorish when I say this, but we make a point to build a relationship with our clients, so that they know us, and we're not some outside person coming in telling them what they need to do or shouldn't do. It's a relationship that is built, so it builds that trust. I did want to go back to your recovery. I'll give a plug for the FBI and Florida law enforcement. While I was at Tallahassee, we had a breach of our payroll system. Came in through a third-party vendor that was managing our cloud payroll infrastructure. It was reported within 12 hours, and of the roughly $500,000 that was siphoned off, we got back $460,000 of it. Because it was reported quickly, they were able to freeze the accounts that it went to, and we were able to get the vast majority of those funds back. So, moral of that story is, if you do have a breach, report it quickly, report it to the appropriate people, and then work the process in order to get, and there's a very good chance that it will minimize that impact.
So I'm going to just kind of point to that the complexity of, you know, the cyber threat continues to evolve. They're getting way smarter in how they can attack us. You know, and we talked about how the attack vector right now is far-reaching. You know, they can come in through your Wi-Fi at your home. and that they can be a persistent threat, meaning they're sitting inside your network without your knowledge for months and months and months at a time, right? So the other piece that I think about at night is, again, how we react and when a threat or an attack does occur, right? And are we doing enough? You know, what you guys just talked about is, if we report it fast enough, the consequence can be managed to be minimal as possible, right? We don't need, you know, the Colonial Pipeline is a great example of how a complex operation occurred that included both a cyber crime and an information operation that leveraged social media to disrupt our way of life, right? And so by attacking a financial, you know, accounting system within, you know, an industry, they then created a narrative online that there's a fuel shortage, when in fact there was never a fuel shortage, right? But it caused us to react and behave in a certain way, right? Where we had people literally going to a gas station and filling up trash bags with gasoline, right? These are not rational responses to what was really happening. And again, it gets back to education, right? We can educate people on how to detect, you know, and defend and respond, but we also need to educate them on how to behave when it happens, right? As we continue to live our lives and rely, you know, you talked about how I could maybe live without power, but I can't live without water. I would tell you, my kids can't live without the internet, right? And they're going to drive me nuts. And there's a lot of people out there that, you know, will react poorly because they're not educated, because they think there's a higher level of consequence than there may actually be. So I think that's another piece that I don't really see us training at a citizen level, you know, how to react in the event of a cyber response or a crime. You know, I think, what if they would take away our ability to withdraw funds from an ATM? You know, how would general society respond? I think they're going to show up at the bank and try to withdraw funds. And we all should know there's not enough printed money in the banks for all of us to go and withdraw it, right? That's exactly what happened with the Colonial Pipeline, okay? Is they created a narrative and we overbought. We bought in excess, and that created the fuel shortage in local areas, right? And that could have been a different outcome had we just educated that population a little differently. So I offer that as an idea.
Yeah. I would throw the same thing in many different industries. If that narrative is created, that's an issue.
So, all right. Thank you.
Everybody.